This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, and one quick question that I wanted to ask before I actually started is that, guys, this Friday is Ganesh Chaturthi, so shall we have a class on that day? Like, is everyone comfortable with that? If I basically take a class then, or shall we call it a festival holiday and we can regroup on Monday? Anything is like okay with me.
Please regroup. I'm not available, or I'm okay with anything others.
Okay, guys. So like the rest
Yes,
of all,
please
like
regroup.
okay. Okay, fine. So I'll go with the majority. So we'll regroup and we'll cancel the session on this Friday, and we'll regroup on Monday, and we'll start the sessions from then. I hope everyone is okay with this, guys.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, fine.
great. Fine. So now we were talking about, yesterday we were talking about a basic load balancing, right? We said we had a basic load balancer. We made sure to put both the virtual machines in the same availability set, and we made sure that this virtual machines are a part of this particular availability set, and then we went ahead and put a load balancer in front of it, and it was a basic load balancer in nature, so it was able to go ahead and, let's say, load balance my entire traffic, meaning divert my entire traffic according to a logic called round robin. So it went ahead, first request went into VM1 second, and it went ahead and did that kind of alternating kind of a logic out there, which is good, not a problem. But what if I don't go for an availability set and I go for an availability zone? So when you go for an availability zone, right, your virtual machines will definitely not be in the same availability set. It'll definitely not be in the same availability set. It'll definitely be in a different availability set as such. So here the issue is that then how do I load balance these out? Then if we are doing something like an availability zone, for example, in my VMHA, my first virtual machine, that is like in East US2, is in an availability set called AV set 1. This is something that we seen yesterday. We just created it, and this was running in fault domain 0 and update domain 0. Great. But I have also went ahead and created another virtual machine called VM2 in the morning. And while creating this VM2, what I did is like I did not put it in an availability set out there. So I did not go ahead and put it in an availability set. So there is no availability set for this. But it's in the same region. Yes, definitely in the same region. Now what I want to do is I want to load balance this out. Now since there is no availability set, let's take this out. I want to load balance, but in this case, I will not be able to use a basic load balancer. I will be able to use something known as a standard load balancer. Instead of a basic, like rather than using a basic, I will be using something known as a standard load balancer. And one prerequisite for a standard load balancer is that the IP that you attach to this load balancer should be of a SKU called standard. And the devices, meaning the virtual machines that you're attaching to this particular load balancer, should have a static IP, should have a static private IP. So firstly, let's make these two machines as static and then go for a load balancing. So how do I make it as a static? So I came into my virtual machine, and all the the public and the private IP gets attached to where, guys? It gets attached to my NIC card, right? So I'll say networking. I'll say network interface. This is my network interface card. I'll say IP configurations. And under IP configurations, this is where my IP configuration is. I'll go ahead and I'll make it static. I'll say save. So it wasn't dynamic, it had a dynamic assignment. But now I said, okay, fine, you know what? I want to make it static assignment. So please go ahead and make it static. The same thing I'll go ahead and do for the other virtual machine also, which is like VM1 in the, in my resource group. I'll also make that particular virtual machine as static. So I'll go here again into networking, into the NIC card. you can directly go to the NIC card, not a problem. But since it is easy to identify which NIC card belongs to which VM, I take this approach. Into the IP configurations and make this as a static IP. I've also made this one as a static IP out here. After some time, and this is like saved, and this virtual machine is a static IP. I mean, it's just static IP. Now the only thing that I need to do is just restart this virtual machine so that it'll get reflected. So I went I'll go ahead and just do a restart out here. And this is also, I think, done. Yes. So I'll go to this particular virtual machine and restart this virtual machine. Now I have two different virtual machines running on a static IP assignment, not belonging to the same availability set, and both are IIS machines. Like we have something called IIS installed on top of it. So I can go ahead and check this out. HTML. It says, this is our VM1. Same thing applies to VM2 also. If I take this IP, if I put it in here and I do a default.html, it says this is our VM2 East US2. So I just said it is VM2 East US2, and I just put an additional dialog out there telling it is VM2 East US2 and something like that. Now two machines, both running on IIS. Now let's go ahead and load balance these. So I would say, okay, fine, load balancer. I'll say create a load balancer. And the load balancer again should be created in the same region as my virtual machine is. So I'll just take VMHA, the same resource group. You can also create it in a different resource group, not a problem. So I'll say this is a standard load balancer now. Balancer East US2, because both the machines were in East US2. It is of a type public, SKU standard, tier regional. Now let's also talk about what global load balancing is all about and all that stuff. But by default, guys, a load balancer is what? A regional device in nature. So I'll say it is a regional. Now I'll go ahead and let's say create a front-end IP to my load balancer. And I'll say this is standard front-end IP, FEIP, IPv4 and create. And if you look at this, right, the SKU is static. And assignment is static. SKU is standard. It says the SKU is standard because you are attaching this to, let's say, a standard load balancer. And I'll say this is a standard IP. This is fine. And I'll just say zone redundant. I'm not really going into that right now. Just saying this is zone redundant, and I'll say okay. Just create, not a problem. Add. It says yet to be created, not a problem. Now I'll go ahead and add my backend pools. The same thing what we have done yesterday. So I'll say pool 1, virtual network being VMHA VNet, IPv4 assignment. Okay, so let's give it a couple of refresh out here. This might take some time to attach these virtual machines out there. Okay, resource group is VMHA. Name is standard B. East US2. Public standard, fine, not a problem. IP configuration is the same thing again. Standard IP. Public IP is again new public IP standard. New public IP standard. No zone, this is fine, not a problem. Let's see, add. Let me try this once again. Let me see why my virtual machines are not getting reflected. Okay. You can only attach a virtual machine that has a standard SKU IP or no public IP configurations. All the IP configurations must be in the same virtual network. Okay, fine. So the issue is that it's telling that the SKU basically that you selected out here like the public IP address that you kind of selected out here, is a basic public IP. Like this public IP address basically that I attach to my particular load balancer. Like this particular public IP assignment is a basic. So if you want to attach a virtual machine out here, which is in the same virtual network, there are two conditions out here. One thing is that the public IP for your particular load balancer should be of standard SKU or no public IP configuration. All the public IP configurations must be in the same virtual network. I'll say, okay, fine, since this is basic, what I would do, I cannot convert it into, let's say, a standard right now. What rather I'll do is that I'll detach it. I'll make sure that there is no public IP at all. How do I detach it? Come here, again go into, let's say, the NIC card, because the NIC card is something which has the IP configurations and all. Go into the IP configurations, go into this one, like the IP config 1, and say disassociate. And this should be static out here. Once this is disassociated, just go ahead, give it a restart. Same thing for virtual machine 2 as well. Now, if you look at this particular virtual machine, this one doesn't have a public IP attached to it, which is good for me because I want to attach it to a load balancer and it will any which ways take the IP of the load balancer, right? But if you want to have a load public IP out here, it should be of a standard SKU and not a basic SKU. That's like one of the prerequisites when you are going for a standard load balancing. So I'll say, okay, fine. I'll go to my VMHA. I'll do the same thing to my virtual machine 2 as well. So let me take my virtual machine 2 and disassociate my public IP to it. So going into networking, again going to the NIC card and IP configurations and disassociate and restart the machine once again. And both the machines were in ECS2 only. So this is in ECS2 and the first machine was also in, let's say, ECS2. Just checking my cron configuration. So ECS2 and my first machine was also in ECS2 as such. VM1 is in ECS2 without a public IP. So I have disassociated both the public IPs right now. And now I am waiting for just, this particular configuration to get saved and I can restart this out. And once I restart it, we'll again start the creation because right now it's saying that, it's not associated and all that stuff. Like no virtual machines are in, but in this particular criteria, please go ahead and refresh things out and all that stuff. So let's try doing this out again. Let me see pool 1. Now it says, what? Yeah, I know that you have both the virtual machines out here. Like I'm good with this because you have disassociated this unfortunately. So I'll just go ahead and refresh this and restart this out too. So just a trick to get around this error is that when you create a virtual machine, try not attaching a public IP to it. That will make things easier. Or if you want a public IP to it, in order to manage things out, go ahead and attach a standard public IP, not a basic public IP. Now I'll say, okay, fine. These are the two virtual machines that I'm interested in. This is the pool basically that I'm interested in. And I'll say add. So I've added both the machines in the same pool, belonging to the same virtual network, belong in the same region with a static private IP and no public IP. I'll say great, not a problem. Now I'll say give it a rule and I'll say this is same rule 1 HTTP, the one that we did yesterday. And I'll say if it is front end IP is this load balancer IP. And if someone hits at a port called 80, go to a backend port called 80 into a backend pool called pool 1. And let's configure the health probe. And I'll say this is health probe health probe 01. Protocol is TCP, HTTP, anything is good, but right now I'm taking a generic, right? So it is a TCP protocol, and I'll say, okay, fine, okay, and say add. So inbound rules is also done. I'll say outbound, no rules, tags, nothing. Review and create this out. And it's validating all my changes, and now I'll go ahead and hit on create. Now it'll go and it'll try to attach both the virtual machines to a load balancer, which is of a standards queue. And once it is done, right, what will happen is that this IP, which gets attached to the load balancer, gets delegated to the virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2 also. So as we discussed yesterday, these IPs get inherited by the virtual machines. The virtual machines kind of inherit the IP that is assigned, or that basically is given to, let's say, the load balancer as such. And most common errors that I have observed is during the NIC card attachment. Like these are the two NIC cards basically of the virtual machines that are sitting in the backend. So why is the NIC card getting updated? It's because you're attaching the IP to it, right? So what is happening here is that you are attaching the IP of this load balancer to virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. So where are you attaching it? To the NIC card, right? So this is what it tells. Okay, fine, I'm updating the NIC card and stuff. And if there are any errors, right, it'll throw here. This is the place where I've like seen a lot of errors basically that are coming up. Common errors, if you're creating a basic load balancer, they have to be a part of the same availability set. If they're not a part of the same availability set, and if you still try to go ahead and attach it, this will start throwing errors telling that, hey, you know what, the NIC cards are not sitting in the, let's say, the same availability set. Can you please go ahead and kind of delete your virtual machines or attach them, or give me some virtual machines that are a part of the same availability set. And since this was a load balancer that was of a standards queue, it did not go ahead and throw that error, because it says, you know what, I'm a standard load balancer and I'm good with it. Like even if your NIC cards are in different region, I am kind of good with that. So right now, if you see, the load balancer has a public IP of 1377.67.156, which will be inherited by both the virtual machines. Here I have disassociated the public IP, but after a couple of refresh, I had 1377.67.156. Same thing applies to this machine also, meaning they are inheriting the public IP of the load balancer out here. This is how the load balancer actually works. This is how the load balancer identifies that these two are a child resource to a parent resource called load balancer. So now load balancer has become a parent resource, and load balancer has a public IP that is now exposed to the public out there. That is exposed to, let's say, the people out there, right? To your users out there. Now I can take this, put this in, and I can say default.html, and it went ahead and took it from VM to ECS2. If I go from an incognito window, it probably might take another virtual machine. Now it's still taking VM to ECS2 because it did, let's say, a cookie caching and all that stuff. And normally for you to, let's say, demonstrate this in a proper way, right? Like the round robin in a proper way, you have to basically have a lot of requests that are coming in. So this is quite common to see, both the virtual machine, both the requests, like, getting from the same VM2, not a problem. But right now, it's trying to do a load balancing out here, and it is diverting my traffic to both the machines that are sitting in my backend pool out here. And just in case one of the machine goes down, let's say VM2 goes down, you can basically go ahead and the load balancer will automatically go ahead and divert your traffic to the available virtual machines in the backend. And how is it able to identify this? Using something known as what? Health probe, which is the main piece that makes load balancer a bit smart, which is making load balancer a bit smart out here. So guys, any questions here, anything? Now everything, the entire procedure was same. Like it's the same procedure what we do to create a basic load balancer. But the only change is that for your basic load balancers to have a proper backend pool, the virtual machines should have a static private IP, a standard public IP, or a no public IP. Either of them works out. I went ahead and attached a basic public IP, and it was throwing an error telling me that, hey, you know what, I don't find any virtual machines in the backend because your virtual machines have a basic public IP and I cannot accept it. That is what was the error message, or that is what was the information message that it was kind of throwing out there for me. Guys, any questions with this?
Yeah, this static private IP is the one you given or the Azure it given?
So private IP is always taken from the subnet in which these virtual machines are residing in. So it's always an assignment by Azure from the IP address pool of the subnet in which these particular virtual machines are residing in.
Okay. And again, same question. How to access these two machines individually?
Sure. So that is something that I'm coming right now.
Okay.
So like before that, guys, any questions here?
Health probe is also a resources, right?
Health probe is not a resource that you'll be able to see here. Like it won't get reflected in the resource group, but this is a resource within the load balancer. It's a resource that is within the load balancer as such. So that is something that you won't be able to see outside it. It is within the load balancer as such.
Okay, great.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, you provided a static IP that is provided by Azure. Normally, for normal system, you said I am changing IP from dynamic to static. Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Static in the static means in normally our system we want to create static means we want to static IP for normal system means it will you want to talk with some providing all those things. Azure
ISP
will
provider,
maintain
right?
all.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that is
see,
the.
if it's a normal system, right, like the laptop that I'm using, the laptop that I am using does not have a static IP assignment, because this particular IP is assigned to me by the internet service provider that I'm using. Okay, so I am basically connected to my router, and that particular router has an internet service provider attached to it, and that particular internet service provider gives it a static IP. But in my case, I know which pool of IPs that I'm actually sitting in. I know that my IP addressing, my private IP addressing, will have to fall or will have to take one IP from this particular address space. So I can ask Azure that, hey, you know what? Give it a static IP and give it a, and you basically by default Azure tells you that, okay, fine, this is the address space where your virtual machines are in. So one of the IP that I'll take from this particular subnet pool, I'll assign it to your machines. This is how it kind of assigned. Does that answer your question, Avinash?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And you just run the scripts, right? HTML scripts for the servers.
Yeah, I ran the same script that I did yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. So since I ran the script, you're able to see this out. So I just ran the script out there, like the same thing what I did yesterday. So great for a user. Like this is like very good for a user because by default they are hitting a load balancer, which is all good. Like everything is great, not a problem. But now is that how about an administrator? Like I'm not an external user, I'm an internal user, and I need to make sure to update these virtual machines, or let's say install something like a software inside these virtual machines, or whatever it is. By the end of the day, I want to do an RDP inside this virtual machines. Like virtual machine 1 and 2, I want to do something like an RDP into it. This is what I want to do because I'm, let's say, an internal user out here. And for an internal user, my only concern is about the administration of it. But the thing right now is that these two virtual machines are getting inherited with the public IP of the load balancer. Like they're being inherited with the public IP of the load balancer. Then how do I do an RDP to it? Like, can I take this IP and do an RDP? If I do, then which machine am I going to hit? Is it VM2 or is it VM1? Because both the machines right now have the same IP, right? So there is no way that my remote desktop server or my remote desktop basically can resolve this IP to an actual machine. There is no way it can do. It says, you know what, I don't know what you're asking about because it's a load balancer IP and I have like two, If it's 2, it's 2. If it's 20, it's 20. So many machines in the backend. So I don't know which machine that I need to divert you to. So can you please give me a proper rule? And this is where something called as network address translation plays a very key role out here. Something known as NAT rules. NAT is nothing but an acronym for network address translation. So what I'll do is I'll come to my load balancer right now, because this is the public facing out here. I'll say inbound NAT rules, and I'll say, you know what, I do not have a rule. I want to add a rule. I will say, okay, the rule name is RDP into VM1. Front-end IP address is the front-end IP address of the load balancer. Service, it's like giving me a huge amount of services, so I'll say it's a custom service that I want to. Now I'll say port is some random port out here. I'll say 4000, some random port out here. Now I'll say, you know what, if someone hits this public IP, okay, if someone hits this public IP at a port called 4000, divert them to a backend into VM1, into the VM1's IP configuration, which is 10.1.0.4, into a backend port called 3389. This is called port mapping, guys. So again, name, I'm giving a name, I'm giving the front-end IP address. And what front-end IP address is this? This is the front-end IP of the load balancer. So I have a load balancer sitting in the front, which is listening at this particular port, which is listening at this particular IP called 1377. So 13xxx, something like this, which has like two machines out here, VM1, VM2. Now I'm saying, if someone hits this IP at a port called 4000, map them like this 4000, right? It can even be 1, 2, 3, something like that. I'm just taking a random number. I'm saying if it's a port 4000, map them to a backend machine at a port called 3389, because 3389 is where your RDP basically listens to, right? That is the port number for RDP. I'll say, okay, fine, this is how the custom rule is. So I'm creating a rule right now. So what happens is something like this. So I say, okay, fine, this is great. I'll say add. This is a custom rule that I'm creating out there. And after this, I'll also create another rule for my second virtual machine.
Cannot we achieve this role instead of NAT? Can we assigning the DNS name for the respective VMs?
You cannot, because you need to have a DNS resolution in that way. Then your concepts called DNS zones, DNS server comes into picture.
Yeah.
This is completely network address translator, because right now I am interacting with the public IP of the load balancer. So I want to make sure to I want to basically go ahead and do an RDP into my machine. So even if I do a DNS, right, I won't be able to do an RDP into the private IP address of my machines. Azure will never allow me to do an RDP or directly connect to a private IP of any machine that I'm using out here. So this is definitely not allowed. No matter how many rules you define, this is definitely not allowed. But a way to achieve this, we will also discuss about it. So in order to make sure that an administrator who doesn't want to hit the particular private IP is coming through the public IP, this is how the port mapping is actually done. Does it answer your question, Chandra?
Oh, yes.
So this is like RDP VM1. So I'll just create an RDP VM2 rule out here. So I'll say RDP VM2, and I'll do the same thing. I'll say front-end IP is like this, IPv4, services custom, which is okay. Port is now 4001. I took out second port out here. Target is VM2. IP configuration is the IP configuration of that particular VM2. Custom 3389. And I add this particular rule. Now what happens right now is that I am making sure to have an address translator out. So I am saying, okay, fine. If someone hits the particular load balancer and tries to RDP into a backend machine, please allow them to do, not a problem. I am okay with it because port 3389 is open and all that stuff. And this is a public facing load balancer out there. So just take this particular IP. And if I want to go into VM1, right, I'll say this one, colon 4000. This is how I communicate to my machine, telling that, you know what, it is port 4000. Now you see, it's giving me an option to log in. And I will now log into the VM1. This is how I do a port mapping using something known as a network address translator. Using something known as a network address translator out there. This is how I opened up a port. Now, if I want to do it for the same thing, like for VM2, right? I have a rule now, listening at port 4001. So I'll take, okay, fine, the same IP at 4001. Now say, see, it is VM2 East-US2. Fine, not a problem. Say VM2 East-US2, and this got disconnected. Say yes. And I can now go into this particular session out there. And now I can establish, let's say, a session with the VM2 as such. This is how I will be able to establish an administration, meaning I will be able to allow an administrator to go ahead and log into it. Now, then one question is that, let's say if my virtual network has something like about 100 virtual machines, and I have like 100 different virtual machines in the backend, and I've attached all those virtual machines to the standard load balancer. So now, do I have to do a port mapping again? Like, do I have to do 100 port mappings again? Because this is becoming a bit tedious job. 1 or 2 machines, it's good. Do I have to do the same thing? No. The easiest way or the easiest answer to that is that both the virtual machines are sitting in the same virtual network, are sitting in the same subnet, meaning by default, they can talk to each other on their private IP addresses. You will not need something called as a DNS resolution for this. We'll talk about what DNS resolution and all that stuff is, but you would not need anything additional to it. For example, right now I am in VM2. I can go into VM2 over a private IP address of this particular guy. And I can now do an RDP from inside the virtual machine 2 to virtual machine 1. I did not have to create any other special rule because both the virtual machines, right, they're sitting in the same virtual network. And by default, if you look at the rules of, let's say, if you look at the network security group rules, by default, you have all VNet inbound that is at 6500, meaning whatever the traffic is, whether it's like HTTP, whether it's like RDP, whatever it is, I don't care. I am okay with it. Meaning if I even go ahead and look at the server of it, like even if I want to look at the IIS of it, IN answers of great. If I even want to look at the IIS of it, I can say like from this particular machine, from the machine 1, I can go to 10.1.0.4/default.html. I'll be able to see the IIS of it also. So these both the virtual machines, guys, are in the same virtual network. So they will be able to communicate with each other without you having to define anything special. But in case you want to, let's say, allow someone, because I at least need one machine to be allowed, right? Now it makes my job easy. Even if I have 1 or 1000, if I declare one rule, that is sufficient, right? If I declare one rule, that is sufficient because I can go inside that particular virtual machine and then, ping any other virtual machine in that particular network. That makes my job kind of easy. Chandra, does this answer your question? Does it make it easy for you?
Yes, obviously. Yeah. So you said within a same network,
Mhm.
in the internal access, right? So
Right.
if you have the both VMs are in same virtual network, but different different subnets.
Subnets. Yes, it's still okay
So
because there's rules, right? It defines this all VNet inbound. So even if it is like a different subnet inside the same virtual network, you still do not have to do anything. But if VM1 is in virtual network 1, VM2 is in virtual network 2, that is when you will have an issue. That is when they will not be able to communicate with each other. And if you want to
okay.
establish a communication with each other in that way, you have a concept called virtual network peering. That is something that we are going to look at when we look at the connectivity options in the virtual network, which is tomorrow. So even then you can go ahead and let's say make both the virtual machines talk to each other using a concept known as virtual network peering. And actually virtual network is a very vast concept, guys. You have a lot of things that is like in the virtual networks. So I'm just trying to cover the most asked, the most widely used, but you'll still have to look into the documentations and all that stuff. They're like really evolving and all that stuff out there. Okay, you're coming back to this, guys. So any questions here with the network address translators? Did everyone understand this out, or are there any questions with this? Did anyone not follow anything with this?
Sanjay here.
Yeah,
Regarding port, we given 4000 or 4001. So
right.
will that port needs to be open?
No, by default when you create this rule, right, that particular port will get open on that particular IP address.
I mean,
So
in
this is
restricted
just
network.
a no. In the recipient network, right, 3389
Mhm.
should be open.
Okay.
This is just a proxy
Okay.
to get around
And
with that.
okay, in case if we wrongly use the existing ports like 80 or 443, will it
Mhm.
throw some errors?
This one, no, it won't. It won't. Like
Okay.
it will not throw any error out there. The
Okay.
only condition is that if you have like 10 different virtual machines out here, and if you want to establish 10 different rules, then the port should be different. You cannot reuse the same port. Like I cannot reuse the same port right now. I cannot say it is VM3 if I have a VM3 and I want to do an RDP into it. I cannot say this is like 4000 again. Say, you know what, the front end port is a combination and you have already used it out. So I won't be able to reuse my port. This is called port exhaustion.
Okay.
I've used it, I cannot reuse it because it makes sense, right? You cannot basically do an RDP using the same port in two different virtual machines. That is something that is not allowed at all. But in general, if we have an application like this, and if you want to, let's say, do an RDP into it, then we just allow one particular port out here, and everything else is taken care of it because all these are internal, to my network. Everything is like everything else is internal to my network. So I can go ahead and ping my machines at a private IP address. So that makes administration a bit easy. Okay, any further
Okay.
questions, guys, with this? Okay then. So now of late, Microsoft, like earlier, like about 6 months before, when you looked at this particular concept called load balancing, it was very regional. Like this was all like very, very regional. You did not have an option to go ahead and do disaster recovery and all that stuff. Later, what Microsoft did is that Microsoft said, you know what, even this needs to be global. Like even the load balancer is like a service, and I know that people have different servers out here. Like for example, I have both the servers in EastUS too, and now I want to establish a zone redundancy, meaning my applications should also be running from a different zone. So just in case the entire EastUS2 region is down, I should be, in a position to go ahead and divert my traffic to, let's say, something like a North Europe. Is it possible? Definitely yes, with a concept called global load balancing. Now, there is an option called regional and global while you take a, while you create a load balancer. And what happens here is, what basically you need here is that you'll firstly need a load balancer, which is global in nature. And the backend pools of this load balancer, right? It will not accept virtual machines. Rather, it will accept load balancers again. So I have n number of regions. For example, I have two regions, East US 2 and North Europe. I have 4 virtual machines, 2 sitting in East US 2, 2 sitting in North Europe. The first thing that I'll do is I'll attach a standard load balancer to East US 2 and attach a standard load balancer to North Europe 2. North Europe. And take these two load balancers and attach it to the global load balancing. This is how I kind of get around. So how do I do it? Firstly, I have 4 machines. Yes, I do have 4 machines, like 2 in this one and 2 in North Europe. So VM4 and VM5 are in North Europe. VM4 and VM3 are in North Europe, sorry. And the same thing that I can do, I can disassociate the public IP and I can make this static so that I'll attach a standard load balancer to it. That's the first thing. So I'll say, okay, fine. IP configurations. I'll go into the IP configuration, disassociate the public IP out here and make this static and give it a save. And the same thing I'll do with, let's say, the other virtual machine, which was VM3 North Europe. And all of them have the IIS servers installed. So I just install the IIS servers on top of them. And right now I'll say, okay, fine, VM3. Networking. IP configuration. And make this static. And disassociate the public IP. And once this is done, once this is saved successfully, just go ahead and restart the virtual machine one quick time so that it won't throw any errors. So I'll say restart. And once this is done, we'll also go ahead and restart this out. And while it's getting restarted, I can now go ahead and create a new load balancer called Standard LB North Europe in VMHA1. As it is a standard LB North Europe, NE for short. I'll say it is North Europe. I'll say it is a public facing load balancer. It's a standard. It's a regional load balancer. Now I'll say, okay, fine. The front-end IP configuration is North Europe front-end IP. IPv4, create a new one. I'll say North Europe IP. I'll say no zone, which is great, not a problem. I'll say add. Now into the backend pools, I'll select the virtual network that is there in, let's say, North Europe. I'll say it is pool 1. NIC card is the same thing. Attach both the virtual machines that are there in the backend. Add this one out. Add inbound rules, same thing. I'll say it is like rule HTTP 80. So front-end IP is the load balancers IP. Port is 80. Backend port is 80 again. Backend pool again is like pool 1. Health probe, I do not have one, so go ahead and create one. So I'll say it is North Europe health probe 1. Protocol is TCP 8080. This is good enough. Fine, I'll say add. I'll say outbound rules nothing. Outbound rule is nothing. Tags is great. Review and create. So what am I doing here is that till now we have configured this, right? We said it's standard load balancer and I've attached 2 machines onto it. I'm doing the same thing. I've created a standard load balancer, attached a public IP to it, put 2 virtual machines in the backend out here, and I'm attaching or I'm creating a load balancer out here. So now I'm creating a load balancer out here. So I have how many? 2 load balancers, one in ECS2, the other in North Europe. All the 4 running the same application. All the 4 running what? The same application out here. Now I want to make sure to balance them. I want to now make sure that, you know what, all these machines that are sitting in the backend with, different load balancers out here, I need to make sure to put something known as a global load balancing solution, which is provided by Microsoft very recently. So I want to make sure that I use this particular concept to go ahead and leverage them to load balance my traffic. Now what happens? Just in case, let's say, again, global load balancer will also work in the same fashion, round robin. One request will go to this one request will go to this one. This will internally round robin the traffic again. Just in case the entire region is down, you have right away North Europe coming into picture. You have right away North Europe coming into your help. So your users will at least get your application. With, let's say, a higher latency, yes, definitely, because if, let's say, the users are in, let's say, East US and they're pulling an application from North Europe, they'll experience slightly a bit of, a bit more lag than the usual, but they'll still be able to use your application. They'll still be able to make sure to use your application out here. Now, if I this is created. So right now we have two load balancers, guys, two standard, one in East US, two in the other in North Europe. Each and every load balancer has two machines inside it. Now I'll say create a load balancer again. Now I'll say fine, this is like any resource group out there. I'll say this is a global load balancing solution, global load balancer, and the regions is very important, and this is the option that I need to select. Now a region is very important when you select a global load balancer. There is a concept in global load balancing called home region and participant region, meaning your load balancer, your global load balancer can only be in one of the regions. It is not available in any other region apart from this. Like if you try to create it, it will start throwing errors. And you can only attach virtual machines, or you can only attach load balancers to it, which are out of these regions. In my case, it is East US 2 and North Europe. Both are there. These are my participating regions. So I'll say, okay, fine. Just East US 2. I'll select an East US 2 region out here, or a Central US region out here. And I'll say it is standard. And I'll say it is a front-end IP configuration for this one now is global LB IP. I'll select a new address, global IP. I'll add this one out. Now in the backend pools, I can now go ahead and add load balancers in the pool. Standard load balancer IP configuration is this one. And standard LB East US 2 IP configuration is this one. This is how I can add things out. If you have multiple regions, you'll have to individually load balance them and then add this one here. Same rules, nothing different. I'll say rule 1, IPv4 front-end IP is this one. My load balance is IP. Port is 80. Backend port will also be 80. Backend port is pool 1. Session persistence is great, not a problem. And did I not create a health probe here? Let me see. Okay, health probe option is not there because it knows that your backend load balancers already have a health probe. So it will kind of use them out. So you do not have to, let's say, create a health probe out here. I'll say outbound rule nothing. Why do I end up clicking this out? Okay, outbound rule is nothing. Say review and create. This is how I am configuring a global load balancer. And when I'm configuring a global load balancer, I am attaching the regional load balancers to it. This is how I am making my load balancer global. Now, can you attach this directly to the load balancer? Because I'm creating a lot of resources out here. I'm creating a standard load balancer. I'm attaching a public IP to it. I'm creating a global load balancer. I'm attaching a public IP to it, and then finally attaching everything together and all that stuff. Like, is there not an easier solution than this? Because this is a bit complicated, and I'm basically, doing a cross load balancing. Definitely, yes, there are like if let's say I was an architect, then firstly I wouldn't even go for a load balancing solution. I have an alternative to it, which is called a traffic manager. We will also see what a traffic manager is and how do you do it and all that stuff. But let's park that for now. For now, what I did is global load balancer attached two standard load balancers to it, and both of them had a particular backend pool out there. And just in case things go down, like when the machines go down, you will have the traffic getting diverted between two different regions out here. This is the concept behind the global load balancing, guys. Guys, any questions with this? Anything?
What?
So when the
Uh,
machines,
Yeah, Akila, go ahead, please.
so when the machine goes down only, it will use the global.
No, not really. By default, this is the public IP that you're going to give to your users. This will be the public IP that you'll give to your users out here. Now see, it is taking from North Europe. Now,
Yes.
if one of you guys probably try it out, it might give you a different page out here. Now, let's say if I take my machine down, meaning I have this configuration and the users are here right now. This is the end user. For the end user, it's just one IP, which is the IP of, let's say, the global load balancer. All these IPs are not exposed at all. So the best practice is that never attach a public IP to your virtual machines when you are doing a load balancing, especially because you will save a bit of money here. Secondly, now let's do a demo out here. Now I will take the VM3. The VM3 is like right now, getting fetched to me, right? Let me take that machine down. Because of some reason, this machine went down. So let me stop this machine out. Like let's simulate a disaster situation out here, and let's see how your load balancer reacts to it. So let's stop this out. Let's deallocate it. VM4. Now it's saying, you know what? I understood that this machine went down. VM3 is no longer available. It's dead because the health probe has reported the same thing back to me. Now I'll give you VM4. And why is it giving me VM4? Is the reason because I am in a physical location which is close to North Europe than to East US. Like all of us are like in India, right? India technically is, or basically geographically is closer to a location in North Europe, like Netherlands or like anything, than East US2. Because East US2 is a bit far away. Even in any which ways you go, East US2 is a bit far away. So that's the reason it's telling, hey, you know what? This location is actually close and the customer is getting a reduced latency. So I'm giving this particular region. What if I take VM4 also down? Let's go ahead and stop this virtual machine also. And after this machine is down, like when it's deallocating, now let's try to hit the load balancer again. Now it has cached my session, so it probably won't give you the best result. But if let's say I go to the incognito window, it now is telling that it is VM2 East US2 because it now understood that both these machines are dead. They are no longer available. It has taken that pool out. Now, what if your VM2 is also gone? Like right now, this is like confirming from VM2. The request is like being fetched from VM2. What if your VM2 is also gone down? When your VM2 is going down, the last hope that you have right now is one machine, which is VM1. This is VM1. Even if this particular server goes down, you will not get anything out of it. Like if I even take this down also, your entire backend pools right now are down. All your machines are down. Like very rare case scenario that all your machines across two different regions that are spread across hundreds of miles and thousands of miles apart are going down. Very, very, very rare case scenario, but something like that happens, then that's it. Like we will not be able to help you out. Simple. That's the reason they say, you know what, like put at least 3 or 4 machines that are in different zones, load balance them, put it in different region, load balance it again, attach it to a global load balancer in this way. So this is the concept, and this is how it kind of propagates out, guys. Now it says the site cannot be reached because it just couldn't find any machine to fetch you that particular request. Does this answer your question, Akila? This is how we give to the customer. Like for an end user, this is the only IP that I'll give, or this is the only IP that I'll expose, because this IP will take care of everything.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions, guys?
Can we have load balance across the region and for to create the global load balancer?
I didn't get your question. Sorry, Sanjay.
See, while creating global load balancer, we are using standard load balancer, right? So
Right.
that standard load balancer can be across the region, right? Is there any specific
No,
code file
standard
you can
load
give it?
balancers can only be in one region, meaning these are regional specific. This is standard regional load balancer. Meaning if this load balancer is in EastUS2, you can only attach virtual machines in the same virtual network that are in EastUS2.
Okay, like this standard, for example, East US to North Europe, and then East US, like that, multiple we can have to connect to
You can have,
global, right?
yes,
Not
you can
only
have
to.
multiple and connect to the global, yes. Until you're following this regions. Your participating region should be one of them.
Okay.
Your load balances, right? Like your load balances should fall in one of the regions. Now that is where architecture comes into picture. Like this is where architecture really comes into picture when deciding about the regions and all. They just don't decide the regions just like that out of the blue. They consider all these factors. They consider what are all the resources that they're going to create. What if I create in this region? What are the advantages? What are the pros? What are the cons? And then they come into an arrival that, okay, fine, this is what I need to do. Like this is how I need to do.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions with this, guys? Were everyone able to understand this out?
Yeah. Can we add regional load balancer to the VM later time?
Yes, you can do that.
You
Yes, you can do that. Initially, you can start off with 2. At the later point in time, you can add more virtual machines into the pool. Like you can just go into the pool and you can add virtual machines into it. Standard will be backend pools. And inside this pool, you can go ahead and add things out here.
so the same way for the inbound port rules also for the LB.
Yeah, for the inbound port rules also, yes.
Okay.
So you can go ahead and add another virtual machine here. If it is in the same virtual network and if it's in the same region.
Okay.
So adding a virtual machine, definitely yes. Ports, definitely yes. The only thing that you cannot do in a virtual machine is that you cannot go ahead and put it in an availability set later after you create it. That's the limitation that we have out here. But a load balancer is more flexible. You can decide to add more machines, like you create more machines out here. You want to add it into your pool. Please go ahead and do that. Not a problem at all.
Can we configure a customized web page at the load balancers? If the VMs are going down, it means if the all VMs are going down, it can show that site is not available like that.
You can do that. You definitely can do that, but you will need another, basically, a virtual machine to host your site, right? Telling that the site is unavailable. Like you at least need one virtual machine to host an error page, because even that's a HTML page, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
at least you need one particular server to do that. So yes, you can definitely do that, but definitely not suggestible in that way, because this itself will kind of give an error page and all that stuff.
Okay.
And one important thing, guys, is that, see, when you're creating load balances, where your traffic is going is something that you cannot control. Like the flow of your traffic is something that you cannot control. That is completely taken care by the platform, deciding upon factors like which server is like closest to you, how is the latency there, how is it performing, what is the health. All these factors together will tell the load balancer where your traffic should actually go. And 99% of the times, your load balancers are actually good. Like they are actually good devices which will help you, let's say, divert all this traffic and all. Any further questions?
Can we create health probe at global load balancer?
No, global load balancer will not take a health probe because it relies upon the health probe of the regional load balancers.
Okay.
Can we configure that percentage of the requests at global so that this percentage can be diverted to specific
No,
location?
you cannot do that. You cannot do that. The reason behind that is that the load balancer is completely a Microsoft managed service. So you cannot do that. Load balancer has the round robin logic and a combination of all these things. So that is something that you cannot control at all.
We added global in the different region, right? So can we add the same region like load balances like East US 2?
So you want the global also to be in ECS2, is it?
Yes.
You can do it, not a problem. Until and unless your home region is something like this. If this is one of the home region, then good. If it is not, then you will not be able to create a global load balancing. And this is a very new concept. Like this has been created very recently. Like the global load balancing is a concept that kind of got very recently out here, and that's the reason there is a lot of limitation with it. And Azure is like kind of improving their own service delivery mechanism. Earlier, you did not even have a concept called global load balancing. Load balancer was completely regional. There is no option to go ahead and balance your traffic load, balance your traffic out there globally. It's like completely regional out there. But right now they said that what, we also kind of use, let's say, a cross regional load balancer to do it and all that stuff. But for better control, like if I was an architect and if I am architecting a solution out here, I would go for a traffic manager instead of a global load balancer. Like that gives me much more advantage of doing things out and all that stuff. We can also look into what a traffic manager is and all that stuff. Any further questions with this particular concept, guys? And when you decide to go ahead and delete the load balancer, just don't go ahead and directly delete it. It won't delete it. It'll start throwing errors. So just delete the load balancing rule first, then the health probe, then the backend pools, and then the load balancer itself. So if I go ahead and delete it directly, it will just throw me an error telling that what, there's a lot of things that is configured. I won't be able to delete it. So in case you want to delete it, load balancing rules, health probe, backend pools, and then the entire load balancer itself. The order of deletion is that way. So any further questions before we close the session today, guys? So what are we going to do tomorrow is that there is one more concept, a very small concept called custom script extension, which I need to cover. So that is something that I'll cover tomorrow. And after that, we will go into a topic called connectivity, which is one of the most important concepts that is there when you're dealing with something known as a networking. So we'll talk about connectivity and the concepts inside connectivity. And after that, we'll talk about DNS, and then we'll end the session for IaaS services. We'll end the session for IaaS services. And then we're going to move into the PaaS services of the things. Is that okay, guys? Does anyone have any questions before we close things?
So are you going to explain this to traffic manager also tomorrow?
Yes, definitely. But traffic manager, I will explain it with the PaaS service like web apps, and I will also apply the same thing to the virtual machines.
Okay.
Because I experienced in the previous batches when I was talking about load balancer and traffic manager in the same class, there was a bit of confusion that was going around. So just in order to avoid that, first let's get comfortable with load balancing, and then we'll go into traffic manager. Okay, guys, anything before we close it? Okay, guys, then that's it from mine today. Have a great day ahead. And just a reminder, so we will not be having a class on the Friday, and we will regroup on Monday instead of the Friday. So have a great day ahead, guys. We will meet tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.